Can you believe it has been 50 years since Status Quo released their 8th studio album, On the Level? It was their 4th release on Vertigo Records, the previous ones being Piledriver, Hello and Quo, the previous 3 years, and this was also their 2nd UK number 1 after Hello, and it contains their to date only credited UK number 1, Down Down, which reached the top spot in the singles charts in January of 1975. But what about the album itself? Well, let's start with this album cover, because I'm sure, like myself, when I first discovered this album, I looked at this cover and said, how on earth did they do that? Because what we have on this front cover is Alan Lancaster on one side, larger seemingly than the others, Francis Rossi in the middle, and then Rick Parfitt and John Coughlan, slightly smaller than the rest, bunched up in the other corner. And I wondered how they did it. It's an old photography technique called an Ames room, which achieves this illusion. I love the fact that they were using this old photographic technique in the 1970s. And they do it again on the other side of this album, because we have Rick Parfitt in the middle now, with John Coughlan, large on one side, and then Alan Lancaster and Francis Rossi looking very moody and bunched up on the other. So this came as a gatefold, which featured images from the Quo 127 Camera Club, which can be seen inside, tour pictures, photographs while on the road and such, off stage. I'm sure many fans went through the various images on there, studying them, looking up the jokes that are written above the photographs, like little sayings, and wondering what they meant in an age pre-internet. Let's now take a look at the album itself. We had a sleeve with lyrics on both sides, which is the standard in this era. And then on side A, we had Little Lady, Most of the Time, I Saw the Light, Over and Done, and Night Ride, the latter of which being the B-side to Down Down. And then an extended version of Down Down, Broken Man, What to Do, Where I Am, and finishing the album with a version of Chuck Berry's Bye Bye Johnny, a track which they had been performing in the last sort of few years, Alan Lancaster taking lead vocals on that. What about the sound of it? Well, the previous album, Quo, was quite heavy. It's possibly their heaviest album to date, the heaviest album they ever recorded. And the previous one, Hello, had that hard rock thing, but it was also sort of on the commercial side. And Piledriver, while it had sort of a rocking front cover, I've always seen it as very light and shade. You have those heavy numbers on there, and you also have songs like A Year and All the Reasons that kind of balance it out. This, I think, takes it and kind of mixes up all the previous modes and comes out with a sound that is naturally clean. I mean, the guitars aren't like over distorted. It's sort of natural distortion that creates the feel on here. Something like, you know, Down Down, once the band kicks in, my goodness, you know, no wonder it was a hit. The album begins with the Rick Parfitt pen track Little Lady, which has since become a live staple. It's an up-tempo track, but the most memorable part of it, I think, is that middle section that kind of slows it down a little bit before going into an absolutely rocking solo, the calm before the storm, and then into the second verse. The second track on the album is the Rossi Young composition Most of the Time, which uses a very similar formula where it starts off quite slow and country and melodic, and then it goes into kind of a 12-bar blues, almost very reminiscent of Railroad, that solo at the end. The first part of this song has been used in medleys over the years, but I remember sitting in a radio studio playing this track, and the rock show guy was before me and he hadn't heard it before, and he was listening to it. He said, "Oh, that's a nice little song." I said, "Wait for it." And when the beat dropped, his face filled with delight, because it's such a beautiful sound that they're making on this record. The third track on this album is the Rossi Young composition I Saw the Light, which has really cool lyrics, sort of talking about a breakup and manipulation, I think, as well. That's just how I read it. And it's an up-tempo number, which might sound simple, but it's not easy to play. I love the way that it goes into the chorus, that some of the stuff going on in there. Alan really putting down a solid groove on this one, and John Coughlin's cymbals doing a lot of stuff in here. It's one of my favourite tracks on the album. The next one is a similar themed, lyrically anyway, Over and Done, which is a Lancaster composition. And again, that riff at the beginning, really addictive, and I love the way that Quo's music, like they often say, oh, it all sounds the same, but Quo's music often has several movements going on in it. I mean, the examples are the long songs like Breaking Away or Slow Train, but even in sort of their 3 to 4 minute songs as well, you have riffs at the beginning that kind of build, and stuff in the middle. It doesn't just go into a solo, it'll like build to the solo. And tracks like Over and Done and the aforementioned Little Lady are ones that do this incredibly well. I love the lyrics in that none of us are getting younger, but we all want to be millionaires. Like it's something like that, isn't it? Well, I've got the lyric sheet here. I should check, shouldn't I? Yeah, none of us are getting younger, but we all want to be a millionaire. And when you stop to think about it, it seems unfair. That's one of my favourite lyrics on this album. The next one, Night Ride, another Rossi Young composition, which is, again, sounds really simple, but it gets in your head. It's the B-side to Down Down, and when they're singing you move me, you can't help it. You can't help but nod your head. Side B starts with Down Down, the single which got Quo to #1 for the first and currently only time. But this is a longer version than the single release. It's 5 minutes and 24 seconds, and I love the way that the song just keeps going. It sort of looks like it's going to peter out, and then it just keeps going. And Alan Lancaster and his bass solo bits, I love it when it's like da 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 da, just towards the end there before they go into a solid groove and fade out. Incredibly addictive, and just for many people the sound of Status Quo. Following 5 minutes of Down Down, we have the Alan Lancaster written and sung track Broken Man, which in the context of this album is the light to the shade, because it isn't really an up-tempo number. It's more kind of mid-tempo and reflective, and I love that about some of Alan's stuff. There's some really cool Francis Rossi lead guitar flourishes on this recording as well. Then we have What to Do, which starts with studio chatter. Well, it actually starts with a slight mistake on the guitar, doesn't it? And then you hear them talking amongst themselves. Have you figured out exactly what it is they're saying? How many times did it take you? How many plays did it take you to figure out what they were saying. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. The track itself starts with, after that, a lead guitar that to me always sounded like it was a little bit out of control at the beginning. It's sort of some strange notes in there, but then it just fits, doesn't it? Because once we get into the solid groove of the song, I mean, yeah, those lead guitar lines are memorable, and Rick Parfitt's rhythm guitar work as well, and the way in which it works with the rhythm section is just addictive. And some of the most interesting lyrics on this album as well, because, you know, I found her in a nowhere and I lost her, and I found her and I lost her in a way. You know, like it's a little bit In My Chair. It's like, what are you talking about? But unlike In My Chair, I guess it starts to make more sense as the song goes on. So then we have The Light once again, one of Rick Parfitt's kind of slow ballads. I mean, he'd do a couple of albums from there with For You. This Is Where I Am, which is just lovely. I love the kind of chorused guitar that's in there. It's not something that you would associate with the sound of Status Quo. That melody of the guitar in the middle, which sort of sounds acousticy to my ears, is just beautiful. And again, it's just bringing some of that beautiful light from the Piledriver album. That is why this album often feels like it's taking the best bits from the previous, putting it into a slightly more refined sound, and then going on with it. You know, absolutely wonderful. The album closes with the Chuck Berry cover, Bye Bye Johnny, a song which they'd been playing live a little bit before this album, and after it became a mainstay. I feel very fortunate to have seen them play it, both with Francis Rossi on vocals in 2007 and Alan Lancaster in 2013. It kind of follows the sound of Down Down, doesn't it? It's what some might term as like typical Quo, but they're locked into the groove, and just the sound of those two guitars just going at it, with Alan and John providing the solid bass for them to roam around in. I do wonder sometimes whether fans were disappointed with Quo doing a cover version to close this album, because after all, the previous two albums had Slow Train 4,500 times, songs with many different movements in them that went in unexpected places. This is a cover, though, which I think fits the rest of the album, and in some cases, you know, it could be compared to Roadhouse Blues from Piledriver. So that was Status Quo's On the Level, their second #1 album, released 50 years ago in February 1975. Did you buy this album at the time? Have you discovered it later? Is it one of your favourites? What do you think of this iconic album cover? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you again for another episode of the Quo-Cast.